Space Cowboy Books presents Simultaneous Times, a science and speculative fiction podcast. Short stories to stir the imagination by contemporary authors.
In this special anniversary episode of Simultaneous Times, we bring you stories from the pages of Apex magazine. Then Came the Ghost of My Dead Mother, Anticlea, by Nadia Radovich, with music by Dr. Auxiliary, read by Jenna Hanchey.
When you were young, Mama sent you away from the land of the dead and told you not to look back. You remember the gray skirts they passed out at the border, long lines like sinew, and waiting in them. The dark cavern sky of Asphodel. Sometimes the wind brought the honeyed scent of Elysian apples. But that is where heroes go, so you had to stay in line. The Furies took your suitcase, your passports, your camel-haired blanket that smelled like electric fires and father. The Furies talked in screaming bird voices to Mama. She was afraid. You remember your Mama afraid. You remember Mama pulling you out of line, hands like cobwebs. "They say you can go, baby," she said, her voice the reedy, remembered voice of shades. "They said, you're still alive, baby. You have to go, baby. Baby, let go." You left the land of the dead with only a hank of her skirt in your baby fist. You left bawling, feet dragging, crying for each vulture to devour you, and all around the reeds of Mama's voice. "Don't look back. Don't look back, baby. Don't look back." And for a long time, you don't. You grow up accidentally. There are funds for children of disaster to go to university. So you do, for a long time, until the university becomes your world, and you become a teacher. You have many dreadful students whom you love equally. You have a book-lined office and health insurance. "Mama, I promise I didn't look back." One night you have a fever that doesn't get better, and a dream that a Fury is standing above you, paging through your passport. "I don't know," she says. "It says you're still alive." Maybe the fever breaks something in your head, because you start to remember. You remember the Furies breaking down your door. You remember Father on the living room floor while they let you and Mama put on coats. You read books about what happened. It's not enough. You read the official passive voice apology. It's not enough. You read Book 11 of the Odyssey, where Odysseus must consult the dead sage Tiresias. He goes to the edge of the underworld and slaughters sheep to let the ghosts feast upon the blood. But the first ghost to arrive is his mother, Anticlea, whom he had not realized was dead. You think about the questions you want to ask your mother. What's your name? What's my name? Where are we from? What happened to us? You read and reread that passage until your colleagues ask if you're going to teach it. You can't stop looking back. You don't have blood, but you do have tomato sauce. You cook the only thing you remember from the labor camps. Stewed beans, acidic with tomatoes. You would make it the way Mama did, only you don't remember. You don't remember her face, but you remember your mother. You'll know her out of all the breathless dead. Copy of the Odyssey in hand, you light the candles. She does not look the way you remember. This shade is the age of one of your students. Your mother is a child. But she recognizes you at once. You can tell from the way her hands flutter to her mouth. Moje diete, she says, in the voice of shades. Ci wyszli? You do not remember this language at all. You are sitting at your mismatched kitchen table. You are afraid to look at your shade mother. You did not have parents long enough to disappoint them. The fear that she may be disappointed is entirely novel. She is fluttering beside you like a moth, a cold spot in the air. At any point in the past lifetime, you could have taken a class on this language. You brought your mother back from the dead for one meal, and you can't even talk to her. There is an acridness as the beans burn. You do not open your eyes until you hear the sound of something soft on plastic. You look up to see your mama dumping the burned beans into the trash. Then she is off, chopping vegetables, going through your meager cabinets, taking down and tasting every spice you own. You have to show her how to light the stove and use the can opener. But mostly, you just sit there, watching your silent, deft mama as she makes something out of nothing, like alchemy. Before the candles are half burned, she has a plate for you. You have to have some, you say, and she says a string of unintelligible syllables that so clearly means, what? Me? No. I could never, I'm not hungry at all. As though this child before you did not probably starve to death. But you have no experience arguing with a parent, so she wins. You eat the beans, and she watches you eat them like it's enough. You eat her share. Children always do somehow. She is delighted to watch you eat. She keeps ladling beans onto your plate long past the point when a normal human could finish them. And when you do not, she looks at you with such mildly reproachful eyes that you try anyway. Try and try until they're almost gone. Your mama, this stranger the age of your students, beams at you. If she is hungry, she does not say. I'm sorry, you say. The food is hot as tears in your stomach. None of this should have happened. I wish you could stay. Maybe she understands. Or maybe she just loves you. Either way, she holds your face in both hands, then chides at you to finish the beans. Pasul, she calls them. It is the only word you think you remember. So you finish them because she asked you to. Then you sit there with your mama's cold hands in yours. You sit there with your wordless mother until the candles go out.
What Happens When a Planet Falls from the Sky by Danny Cherry Jr. with music by Fog Machine. Read by Jean-Paul Garnier and Jenna Hanchey. What happens when a planet falls from the sky? That's the question Damon, Earth X, and Marissa, Earth Y, were tasked with answering. But they were busy eye-fucking each other. Then they remembered the spectators in the background, on both ends of their respective mirror worlds, in the respective public parks, there to watch the overlap. Marissa and Damon could only communicate via tablets.
If our worlds solidified on top of each other, it's possible they would merge.
That wouldn't be bad.
Why?
I'd get to see you.
But our planets could likely snap in half.
Well, you know how to flirt.
Who said I was trying?
Their tablets beeped. The overlap was ending. The two suns in the sky overlapped and turned a bright hue of canary orange with undertones of molten copper. They dreaded that time, when their respective forms would dissipate back into their dimensions, fading out of sight, leaving one another standing in the middle of the park, in their respective worlds. It reminded them they were both on different Earths, only able to see one another temporarily, but nothing else. They both went back to their homes on their respective worlds, but weren't sad. They had a ritual of sorts. Before the rift closed, they would send each other poems over their tablets. A year ago, a rift between two realities opened. Yellow, throbbing splits in the air. Then people began to see translucent forms roaming around, walking through people's bodies. Next came phantom structures, homes, skyscrapers, vehicles. It was like everybody was walking around with their eyes crossed. But it was two similar realities overlapping one another intangibly for 60 minutes a day. Earth X and Y's scientists communicated their findings with one another via tablets that connected during the overlap. Several labs were tasked with figuring out what happens if the realities were no longer intangible and were solid right on top of each other. Damon worked for one lab, Marissa for the other. Their messages started off surface level. Then one day, a book of poems peeked out of Damon's bag. She sent him a suggestion. Then things took off and crossed into the personal. Then, hot and heavy. Due to the short window, every message had to be succinct and tight. What better to share emotions economically than through poetry? One day he suggested Recreation by Andre Lorde. She sent The Floating Poem by Adrienne Rich. Sensual poems expressing longing, touching, wanting. From then on, despite the distance, they were madly in love. One day at the site, No spectators were around. With no prying eyes, they found a tree in the park that was parallel to one another's and sat underneath it in the shade. You really think this could happen? Our worlds colliding?
I don't know.
Are you nervous?
I try not to think about it.
What can we really do about it?
Nothing.
She paused before typing.
Is it corny to say that if the world were to end, meeting you would be the best thing to happen to me?
Just a little corny. She rolled her eyes. Then the telltale beeping. The overlap ended. The next day at work, Damon was greeted by HR. He knew what it was about. He wasn't foolish enough to think they wouldn't monitor communications. That night, Marissa arrived at the rift spot and was greeted with his replacement. She knew their time together ended. They looked for each other for a month, scrambling to remember one another's favorite places. But they were quickly struck with how not every establishment had a perfect mirror. The location of Damon's favorite bookstore on Earth X, in Marissa's Earth, it was a donut shop. Damon found out which scientist replaced him and asked him to tell her to meet Damon at a spot that was parallel between their Earths. He went to the spot, a park bench near the New Orleans Zoo, and she was there waiting for him. Her eyes were soft, his grief-stricken. They both knew they'd never be able to love one another the way they wanted. They couldn't touch or smell or hear one another. There would be no wedding, no kids, no happy ending. A lone tear streaked down her cheek, and he reached to rub it away, only for her to slip right in between his fingers, like clutching at mist. Poetic, she thought, that everything she ever wanted in a person was right before her, but an entire reality away. He thought the same, and on his phone, typed a poem's title and showed her. It was about heartbreak. I Crave Your Mouth, Your Voice, Your Hair, by Pablo Neruda. They both stayed there until the overlap was done, and their respective worlds faded out of sight. When their Earths collided, the ground split open. Sirens rang. People ran and screamed. Some were on their knees praying to gods they suddenly believed in. There were escape pods meant to get as many people off planet as possible. Damon ran to the park. He felt stupid, risking his life for someone he couldn't touch or even hear. But he wanted to see her, if this was the last time. He knew she would think the same. Marissa was there waiting. Earth trembled beneath their feet. No one certain if it would stop once the overlap was done. They reached for one another and they touched. So what happens when a planet falls from the sky? The Earths would fuse together in an amorphous figure eight as everything crumbled. Select few people would fly into the stars to start anew. Seas would rise and cause calamity. And two lovers would finally hold each other. And despite all the emotional poetry they'd read over the years, would bring each other to tears with one simple word.
Hey.
In this episode of Simultaneous Times, you heard Then Came the Ghost of My Dead Mother, Anticlea, by Nadia Radovich, with music by Dr. Auxiliary, and What Happens When a Planet Falls from the Sky, by Danny Cherry Jr., with music by Fog Machine, both from the pages of Apex Magazine. We would like to thank the authors and Apex Magazine's editors for making this episode possible. Find out more about Apex Magazine at apex-magazine.com. Theme music by Dane Luscombe. Be sure to visit us at our bookstore in Joshua Tree, California, or visit us online at spacecowboybooks.com.